Call the Minister.
I ask leave of the House to make a ministerial statement relating to the strategic review of the National Broadband Network.
Is leave granted? Minister.
Mr Speaker, the National Broadband Network is the nation's largest and most costly infrastructure project. Regrettably, it is also the most misunderstood and misrepresented. That is because for the 4 years of its life under Labor, the NBN has been shrouded in a web of spin, obfuscation and exaggeration. Forecasts have been set, missed, set again, missed again, set a third time and missed a third time. Beguiling promises have been offered but not delivered. This is not a question of fibre versus copper. The key issue is only how far fibre optics are pushed out into the network and whether they must reach into every home and every business, or whether existing copper infrastructure can be used for the last few hundred metres and in so doing save much time, inconvenience and many billions of dollars. The NBN project needs, more than anything, an end to spin. After I became the Minister for Communications, I wrote to the employees of NBN Co, telling them that this government expects to receive the unvarnished truth, not what they think we want to hear. Forecasts, business plans and practices need to be informed by sober reality. NBN Co's people must be free to express their views and perform their work without worrying whether they are contradicting a minister's press release. On October 3, the government asked the NBN Co to undertake a strategic review of this vitally important project. In a nutshell, we posed 3 questions. Where is the project now? How much will it cost and how long will it take to complete under Labor's specifications? And what are our options for completing it sooner and at less cost? NBN Co delivered a draft report on December 2 and its final report today. We are releasing the final document presented by NBN Co in full, subject only to certain redactions sought by the company to protect its interests in current and prospective legal and commercial agreements. The strategic review confirms what many Australians suspected, but both of my predecessors as Communications Minister shamefully concealed from the public. The rollout is 2 years behind after 3 years and won't finish until the mid-2020s. Costs are so high that they would add $43 a month to a typical household's broadband bill. And NBN Co faces a daunting internal transformation under its new leadership. Critically, this report is not reverse-engineered to justify or rationalise government policy, whether set out in a speech, conjured up by press release or sketched on the back of a drink coaster. I emphasise this point because the facts so methodically presented in the review make it plain that the NBN is in a worse state than Australians have been told. We were told by Labor that the case for a fibre to the premises NBN was so potent there was no need for a cost-benefit analysis. We were assured this costly project could be built without any increase in broadband charges, and we were repeatedly told that the rollout was on schedule and within budget. Even just prior to the September 7 election, long after it was clear to most observers that the rollout was missing every goal, the member for Grayndler continued to assert 5.5 million households and businesses would get the NBN by 2016. And yet the former minister knew that this was untrue, as demonstrated by the draft 2013 NBN corporate plan that he had received and, according to a leaked minute published in The Australian, presented to Cabinet in July. Turning this project around is a formidable challenge, but we are determined to complete the project as quickly as we can, at the lowest possible cost to taxpayers and affordably for consumers. And we are equally determined that in the rollout of the NBN, the many Australians without adequate fixed-line broadband today, particularly in regional areas, receive top priority. I will start, Mr Speaker, by outlining the strategic review's findings regarding the previous government's NBN policy. Because the situation at NBN Co is far worse than Parliament and the public were led to believe, worse even than the most trenchant critics of the NBN imagined. Construction of the network has fallen further and further behind schedule. At the end of September, the NBN's fibre, satellite and wireless networks were available at 384,000 homes and businesses. That's barely 3% of the 13 million premises NBN Co must reach to finish the job. It's only 45% of the forecast for September in NBN Co's latest corporate plan, and it's over 1 million premises behind Julia Gillard's rollout announcement in December 2010. Because of construction delays, the strategic review estimates Labor's NBN will not be completed until 2024. That's 3.5 years later than stated in the corporate plan, 6 years later than claimed in Labor's original fibre to the node plan in 2009, fibre to the premises plan in 2009, and 11 years later than promised by Kevin Rudd in 2007. The brownfields rollout, which is connecting homes and businesses in established areas, is in even worse shape. At the end of September, 227,000 premises were passed with fibre, which, in the language of the telecommunications sector, normally means the occupant can order a service and receive it within a few days. But 74,000 were service class 0, a term unique to the NBN Co, which indicates that they cannot foreseeably obtain any service. These are mostly businesses and multi-dwelling premises, such as apartment blocks. A further 104,000 was service class 1, which indicates fibre hasn't yet been run from the street into the household or business. This can take 6 months or more, based on current experience. So the bottom line is that the occupants of fewer than 1 in 4 established premises passed by fibre can order a service and expect to get it in a reasonable and predictable time span. The cost of constructing the NBN to Labor's plans has also blown out. The strategic review estimates completing it requires peak funding of $73 billion, another $29 billion or 65% beyond the cost forecast by the current corporate plan. Unit costs for part of the network are twice as much as forecast, while NBN Co is burdened by what the review frankly admits are excessive corporate overheads ramped up in anticipation of a level of construction and customer activity that never materialised. The revenue assumptions made under Labor are also extremely optimistic and entirely at odds with industry experience here or abroad. NBN Co and its advisers found revenues between now and 2021 have been overstated by $13 billion, compared to the midpoint of 2 more realistic revenue scenarios presented, one plausibly optimistic, one plausibly pessimistic. The exact impact of Labor's NBN on the price Australians pay for broadband depends on investment returns and retail service provider margins. But if NBN Co's goal is to earn the 7.1% return promised by the previous government, and RSP margins remain unchanged in dollar terms, Labor's NBN will drive up retail prices by between 50% and 80%. That means a $43 a month increase in the broadband bill paid by a typical Australian household. And that, of course, Mr Speaker, is perfectly obvious. If you seek to receive a particular internal rate of return and your project costs dramatically more to build, the price you have to charge your customers is going to be equally dramatically higher. As I've noted previously, the most shocking aspect of the NBN is Labor's arrogant disregard for the devastating effect of price rises driven by their policy on the take-up of broadband among low-income households. Those opposite may not care, but the strategic review confirms the gravity of the problem. To summarise, the cold, hard facts about Labor's NBN are profoundly at odds with the fanciful tales and wishful thinking of those opposite. And it's important to note that achieving even these projections of higher costs and slower construction schedules requires a very significant improvement indeed in NBN Co's productivity and efficiency from the current levels. In the absence of such an improvement, outcomes would be materially worse. The second broad set of questions the Finance Minister and I assigned the strategic review involved exploring alternatives to the existing NBN, which, as we've seen, will cost billions more and take years longer to complete than was ever admitted to the public. The strategic review's baseline scenario is its revised outlook for the NBN proposed by Labor. Beyond this, it considers 5 additional scenarios. The second is a radical redesign of the all-fibre to the premises NBN. This cuts 1 year and $9 billion off the peak funding, but at $64 billion it's no bargain. The review examines 3 intermediate scenarios which make increasing use of existing network infrastructure to cut costs to more reasonable levels. The 6th and final scenario is an NBN utilising an optimised multi-technology mix, or MTM, model. This optimises the rollout by choosing the most economically efficient technology in each locality, according to its housing stock, existing infrastructure and user demand. The scenario recommended by the NBN Co is the last, the MTM model. But none of the scenarios can escape the irresponsible and wasteful current and future expenses locked in on Labor's watch. The NBN Co strategic review team estimates the burden of these inescapable costs at $15 billion or more. Under an MTM model, 26% of the premises in the fixed line footprint will receive very fast broadband over fibre to the premises. Another 44% are served with fibre to the node, building or distribution point, while the last 30% are served via upgraded HFC, the cable rolled out for pay TV in our capital cities in the late 1990s. HFC networks are capable of delivering hundreds of megabits per second today, just like fibre. But under Labor's plan, Telstra and Optus were to be paid billions of dollars to switch them off. The MTM scenario is the least expensive model scenario, requiring peak funding of $41 billion. Now, this would still be the biggest and most expensive infrastructure project in our history, and the largest single national broadband project in the world. Regrettably, it will be many billions of dollars more expensive than it would have been had the MTM approach been taken from the outset. Labor has wasted billions which we can never recover. An MTM network can be substantially completed by 2019, when 91% of premises in the fixed line footprint will have access to download rates of 50 megabits per second or more, and between 65 and 75% will have 100 megabits per second or more, and entirely finished by 2020. This means the Coalition's goal of completing the NBN in the next 6 years, set out in our April policy, released long before we knew the truth about the damaged project we would inherit from Labor, can be achieved. Disappointingly, that is not the case for the objective we also expressed of delivering nationwide access to 25 megabits per second by 2016. The rollout is drastically further behind schedule than we expected in April. NBN Co's latest estimate of the established premises it will reach with fibre by June 2014 is only 357,000, 772,000 fewer than claimed by Labor at the time of the election. And NBN Co is in a far worse condition, its contractor relationships more damaged and its capacity to change course and assimilate new technologies more debilitated and diminished than even we allowed for. A policy based on the Strategic Review's MTM scenario can, however, deliver very fast broadband to twice as many premises by 2016 as were ever going to receive it under Labor. And let me make this pledge on behalf of the government. We will work assiduously with the NBN Co to do everything we can to surpass the forecasts in the Strategic Review. Likewise, we remain determined to ensure our NBN connects those Australians with the worst broadband in priority, unlike the NBN managed by our predecessors. Upgrading from download rates of 5 megabits per second to 25 or 50 megabits per second would be welcomed by any internet user. But for those with limited or no access to adequate fixed broadband at all, it is transformational. So shortly we will publish the first ever analysis of broadband availability in Australia. It will confirm areas encompassing about 1.5 million premises have little or no broadband. Many are in regional areas. All are victims of the lack of investment in fixed-line communications by private carriers over the past 6 years, which is yet another damaging byproduct of the gap between Labor's rhetoric and execution on broadband. Mr Speaker, the critics of the Coalition's approach to broadband have claimed that the Coalition has not paid attention to the need for remediation of the existing copper plant that would be used in a hybrid model such as is proposed by the company. As honourable members will see when studying this report, that matter has been taken most carefully into account by the authors of the report, and very conservative assumptions have been taken about the level of proactive remediation of the copper network, an approach which is much more conservative than that adopted by comparable carriers. Honourable members opposite have also, Mr Speaker, argued that the end game is fibre to the premises, and therefore, in asserting that, therefore we should build fibre to the premises now rather than upgrade later. Now, even accepting that fibre to the premises is the end game, and for reasons set out in the report, you will see, Mr Speaker, that there is a big question mark over that. Even accepting that assumption, as the report demonstrates, if the upgrade was only 5 years after the investment of fibre to the node, it would still be a considerably wiser and more prudent economic decision. So the proposition, as some honourable members have said, that we should build fibre to the premises immediately, bluntly fails to take into account the time value of money and the importance of flexibility and optionality in terms of emerging technologies. The review's preferred scenario saves $32 billion compared to business as usual under Labor. While that's the sort of number the Rudd and Gillard governments tossed around with abandon, it's a saving that makes a difference. It allows the network to earn a return roughly equal to the Commonwealth bond rate and ensures prices don't rise in real terms. This strategic review points the way to a new corporate plan, but it is not yet the new corporate plan. More work is required to set the NBN on a responsible and affordable course. An important step in the reform of the NBN announced today is the appointment of a new Chief Executive Officer, Mr Bill Morrow, currently the Chief Executive of Vodafone Australia. Mr Morrow is a very experienced telecom engineer and Chief Executive who has managed and indeed constructed telecom networks in America, Asia and Europe. Part of the work that follows is a cost-benefit analysis of the economic and social returns from broadband and a review of the long-term regulation of the NBN Co, which will also inform the new corporate plan. The government is today announcing an experienced and distinguished panel to carry out that inquiry, which will report by June. It will be chaired by Dr Michael Vertigan, AC, who will be joined by Ms Alison Deans, Dr Henry Ergas and Mr Tony Shaw. Mr Speaker, I congratulate and thank the team at NBN Co and its advisers who prepared the strategic review, which is the most thorough and objective analysis of the national broadband network ever provided to Australians, a highly professional piece of work prepared in a very tight timeframe. The internal NBN Co was led by its Head of Strategy and Transformation, JB Rousselot, and ably supported by Tim Ebick and many others. The company's outside advisers were the Boston Consulting Group, who focused on the alternative models and the revenue model, Corda Mentha, who focused on the real costs and real time frame of the existing corporate plan model under Labor, and Deloitte, who coordinated this whole exercise. Valuable insights came from international experts, including Mike Galvin from Openreach in the UK and Mark Ratcliffe from Chorus in New Zealand. Finally, I want to thank the NBN board and most of all its executive chairman, Dr Ziggy Switkowski. Despite the delays and disappointments, the concept of a national broadband network remains popular. Australians want universal access to high-quality broadband, and so does the government. But because of the misguided way the previous government embarked on this project, as much as $15 billion has been unnecessarily spent to achieve this goal, and those dollars cannot be recovered. To date, the NBN has been the most wasteful infrastructure project in our history. But we are where we are, and let me assure the House that under this government we can complete this project as we promised, sooner, at less cost to taxpayers and more affordably for consumers. Our first step in that mission is to end the spin and wishful thinking and embrace reality. This is the beginning of the era of truth on broadband, the beginning of an era when we will have facts to work with, objective analysis instead of political spin. This is the welcome to the real world moment for the NBN. Mr Speaker, I present a copy of the NBN Co Strategic Review Report and a copy of my ministerial statement.
Minister.
Yes, I ask leave of the House to move a motion to enable the member for Blaxland to speak for 20½ minutes.
I call the member for Blaxland. Is leave granted? Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
That so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the member for Blaxland speaking in reply to the minister's statement for a period not exceeding 20½ minutes.
Put the question. Those in favour? Against?
Aye.
Carried. I call the member for Blaxland.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. And well might the minister say welcome to the real world. We say welcome to the world of broken promises. Today is a day that this government will rue for a very long time. Today, the Abbott government is breaking one of the most important and biggest promises that they made in the last election campaign. This government has barely been in office for 3 months, little over 90 days, and yet they are breaking promises left, right and centre. First on debt, then on boats, 2 weeks ago on education and now on the NBN. And this is a betrayal. This is a broken promise that will hang like an albatross around this minister's neck. It is an unforgivable broken promise, Deputy Speaker, and this government will be punished by the electorate for it. Remember the press conference with Sonny Bill Williams in April of this year. Press conference with virtual Sonny Bill and the Minister and the now Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister uttered these immortal words. Under the coalition by 2016, there will be minimum download speeds of 25 megabits. Not anymore. We will deliver a minimum 25 megabits by the end of our first term. Well, today, Deputy Speaker, they are breaking that promise. Before the election, they promised no excuses. Now, today, we get a tawdry list of excuses from this minister. Before the election, they said no surprises. Well, today we get the worst of all surprises from this government. Remember the words of this Prime Minister when he said, "I don't intend on making promises I won't keep." Well, he's just broken a whopper today. One of the biggest and most important promises that this government made, and the minister, from the look on his face, knows it, to the Australian people at this last election. And what it means is that you cannot believe anything that this government says. Not on debt, not on boats, not on education, not on the NBN. Nothing they say is worth 2 bob. Well, here's the truth. Deputy Speaker, I seek leave to table the NBN Co's assessment of the Coalition's broadband policy prepared during the caretaker period.
Leave granted? No.
Of course. Oh, well.
Leave is not granted.
The Minister for Transparency has just told us exactly what we need to know.
Exactly.
This was never about getting us all the information. This was always a stitch-up. And if he was ever interested in the truth, he'd be prepared to allow us to table this document now.
Unless you're going to grant it, don't interject.
Point of order. The honourable member has accused the authors of the NBN Co report of authoring a stitch-up. He has accused Cordamentha, Deloitte, Boston Consulting Group of a stitch-up, and the member should withdraw.
Order. Minister, that's not a point of order. There's no point of order.
Deputy Speaker, this is the real strategic review of the Coalition's dodgy second-rate NBN plan. It's the unadulterated, unamended, uncensored version of the Coalition's plan, written before the minister sacked the experts at the NBN and put his mates in charge. And it's the report that the minister doesn't want the people of Australia to see. The secret advice given to the minister in his first weeks in the job, but never released until today. Now, the minister says this is an old report. Well, says it's dated Friday the 20th of September. A 154-page document, very detailed, and funny enough, it doesn't say what the minister just said. It paints a very, very different picture. It is a scathing document, scathing of the Coalition's plan. It says, 1, building the NBN in 2 stages is the wrong approach and, quote, is not recommended. It says it would cost more and take longer. 2, it says the Coalition's election promise that all Australians will have access to speeds of 25 megabits by 2016 is, quote, unlikely to happen. Well, now we know why they said that out of the minister's own mouth. 3, it says the Coalition's plan will result in lower revenues of up to 30%, which will impact on the ability of NBN Co to raise debt. 4, it says no one knows how much it will cost to fix Telstra's old copper network, so it can be used for the NBN, not Telstra, not the government, not NBN Co. 5, it also says that the cost of maintaining the copper network is estimated between $600 million and $900 million per year. That's between $6 billion and $9 billion over the next decade just to maintain the old copper network. 6, it says the Coalition's promise of minimum speeds of 50 megabits per second by 2019 can't be guaranteed using copper. And 7, it says the Coalition's slower speeds would compromise the provision of telehealth, distance education and other business applications. So all up, what does this report say? It says the Coalition's plan is a dud. It was a dud in April, and it is a dud now. More than a dud, it is a litany of betrayal by this government, who promised one thing before the election and now, after having perpetrated a deceit on the Australian people, is now breaking their promise today. What we know in this document, and what has been proven by what the minister has said today, is that now the NBN will take longer to build than they promised before the election. It will make less money, and it won't meet the needs of business or families. And in the end, we're going to have to come back and finish the job. Now, the minister has said a lot about costs in his speech, and we shouldn't be surprised. But remember this, the capital cost of building the NBN has been outlined in the NBN Co's corporate plans. In the corporate plan 2012-15, it was $37.4 billion. In the corporate plan in 2013-16, leaked to the Australian Financial Review, it was $37.4 billion. In version 13 of the corporate plan, prepared by NBN Co, given to the board on the 20th September, sitting on the minister's desk right now, but not released, it says it's $37.4 billion. Now, all of these accounts, ticked off not just by the company, not just by the board, including 2 members of the board who were there in September and have been there for all of these corporate plans, but also audited and verified by the Australian National Audit Office, by Ernst & Young and by KPMG. So costs verified in government, finance, treasury, these other organisations, and now suddenly it's all changed. Suddenly the experts have been sacked, people have been brought back in, and we've got a different answer. Now some people might be surprised. They might be surprised that all of this information is now out of date, but I'm not. For the last few weeks, I've been warning the Australian public that this would happen. I did it again on the doors today, and I've been proven correct today. You only have to look at what Brad Orgel said in a column that he wrote for the Financial Review a few weeks ago to know why this is the case. And this is what Mr Orgel said, quote, "Selective data, conservative assumptions and extrapolations out to 2021 could be formulated to argue why the NBN might have comprehensively blown out its costs and not achieved its objective. It would be a continuation of the Coalition's attack from opposition on NBN management and board, including threatening a Royal Commission of Inquiry. In other words, change the assumptions, get a different result. You don't have to think hard to see how this has been done. Mike Quigley, the former CEO that the minister likes so much, said this last week, quote, "Rates to build the fibre network based on the existing design and architecture were rising, but those rate increases would not have produced a cost increase because we had identified and validated network and design changes that would have offset those increases." He goes on, "Which is why I find it incomprehensible to hear the suggestion that the increases in LNDN rates should be built into forward projections and cost reductions that have already been identified should not be." Now, here's the killer. Unless, of course, your objective is to try to confirm a preconceived position.
Funny that, eh?
Now, the minister in his contribution talked a little bit about copper and the work that's been done in the strategic review to cost that copper. The fact is, in this report, there's no detail about the exact amount that it would cost to fix and then to maintain the copper network. 3 weeks ago, the minister said at a Comms Day conference, quote, "We want hand-on heart, true, realistic, achievable options, prudently costed and scoped, on which we can make weighty decisions." Now, my argument to the parliament today is that this report doesn't do this. It fails to provide this information. It fails to provide the exact information we need on how much it will cost to fix and then to maintain the old copper network. It gives estimates. It gives international comparisons. It gives, as the minister has just said, conservative assumptions, but doesn't reveal them and doesn't provide us with the information we need. Well, this report that the minister won't let me table in parliament does. It tells us that the cost of maintaining the old copper network could be between $600 million and $900 million a year. And that a year. So between $6 and $10 billion to maintain the old copper network over the next decade. My argument to the parliament is, wouldn't that money be better invested in building a fibre network than keeping going the old copper network? Now, the most important thing today, the most important thing in the report, the most important thing in the contribution the minister has made today is the admission that he is breaking a promise to the Australian people. Now, this is not the only broken promise that he's made today, but it is worth remembering that it's still on the Liberal Party's website. Might not be now, it was when I came down to the parliament. This is the Liberal Party's website. Download speeds of between 25 and 100 megabits per second by the end of 2016. Well,
not happening.
Not anymore. Not anymore. But as I said, it's not the only broken promise here. The minister has also said that he's going to pare back the number of houses that are going to get fibre to the node. In the policy that he put out before the election, he said fibre to the node, 8,968,000 people will get fibre to the node. You know this is true. 71% of the population. Now, gone. All the rest of those people are going to have to rely on the HFC network. The minister said that he's going to fill the gaps there. But will it be an open access network? And who is going to pay to connect the coax from the pole to people's house? Is it you? Is it NBN Co? Or is it the people who live in those houses? And if they do, well, then who's going to pay that extra money? The minister has promised that this would be a faster, cheaper NBN. A faster, cheaper NBN. What we're getting here is a slower, potentially more expensive NBN. Slower because internet speeds will be slower under this model than it would be under ours. Slower because this minister has just broken a promise to deliver it by 2016. And potentially dearer because people in the bush are going to pay more than people in the city. This is the biggest and most important infrastructure project in Australia. And remember this, we sit on the edge of what will be the biggest middle class that the world has ever seen. Our challenge in this parliament is to make the most of it. We often call this the Asian century. It's also a digital century. The wealthiest countries in the decades ahead will be the smartest countries, the countries with the best educated workforces, with the best access to information and with the infrastructure to drive this. That's why the NBN is so important. It is the engine that drives jobs, creates companies, builds productivity, increases trade, makes us a stronger economy and a fairer country. It will help to build the Australia of our imagination. Now, because of this, because the NBN is so important, it's important that it is done right. And that means using fibre, not copper, which we're going to have to come back and replace down the track. Now, the minister keeps telling us what the old decaying economies of Europe are doing. Well, that might be right. They might be investing in maintaining their copper, but we're not part of Europe. We're part of Asia, the dynamic and growing Asian region, and this region is investing in fibre. Japan, South Korea, Singapore, all investing in fibre to the premises. So is New Zealand, and so should we. Otherwise, we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage, left behind with a second-class, second-rate national broadband network. And we learned today one that won't be delivered on time. You know, of all days, on days when we just find out that Holden is shutting its doors, we should be thinking ahead, thinking to the future, thinking of where we invest to make sure we've got a strategic advantage and compete in the Asian century, to set ourselves up for the future, and this government is not doing that. I've said this before, but it's worth saying again. When Robert Menzies was in opposition in 1949, he was one of the biggest critics of the Snowy Hydro scheme. He criticised it uphill and down dale. 2 months before the 1949 election, Menzies refused to attend the launch of the Snowy Hydro scheme. But when he became Prime Minister, he changed his mind. He supported it, he funded it, and he built it. At the opening of one of the, I think it's the Tumut Dam project in the 50s, he said this: "In a period in which we in Australia are still, I think, handicapped by parochialism, by a slight distrust of big ideas, of big people or big enterprises, this scheme is teaching us and everybody in Australia to think in a big way, to be thankful for big things, to be proud of big enterprises and be thankful for big men." Well, Menzies was a big man, but there's not too many big men on that side of the parliament. Just broken promises, one after the other. Debt, boats, education, and now the NBN. We've got a Prime Minister who doesn't understand how important the NBN is, how important this infrastructure is. He's described it as, quote, essentially a video entertainment system. In the Washington Post only a few weeks ago, he called it wacko. But he's also described himself as the infrastructure Prime Minister. Now, if you're going to be the infrastructure Prime Minister of Australia, then you need to build the infrastructure of the 21st century, the infrastructure that Australia needs. And guess what? That's what this is.
Not in their seat.
That's what the NBN is. It's quintessentially the infrastructure of the 21st century. And you can't be the infrastructure minister, you can't be the infrastructure Prime Minister unless you're investing in building the biggest and most important infrastructure project in Australia. Now, today, Paul Keating is visiting Parliament for only his 3rd time since he retired. And Paul Keating, like Menzies, knew the importance of the big calls in government and getting the big calls right. It was his decisions that set Australia up for a staggering 20 years or more of uninterrupted economic growth. In large part, Paul Keating built modern Australia. He built the Australia that we are living in today. And the big decision that we need to make today is whether we're going to build the infrastructure that we need for the next century or just for the next few years. Our responsibility, Deputy Speaker, is to govern not just for this generation, but for the ones who follow. The pace of change and the challenges ahead demand it, and there is no better example of this than the National Broadband Network. Menzies knew it, Keating knew it, and we know it, but this government obviously does not. Today, they have made a very big mistake. They have betrayed the trust that was put in them by the Australian people, and for that, you can be sure they will be judged very harshly.
I call the